I'm Kay Armstrong, and my arts practice is interdisciplinary. I come from a dance performance background, and 30 years or so kind of career making, performing, and directing, administrating, a lot of administrating, and but most recently I've expanded that performance practice into more of a 2D form, visual arts. Primarily, I'm interested in photography and film and video work, but I also do mixed media pieces, 2D works, etc., etc. Forget, but you know, we were all kind of in a shared experience, and so I actually took part in a couple of other exhibitions that were also looking at our shared experience of lockdown and the virus and stuff. So yeah. I mean, we had to start, of course, one sort of like lockdown, and it was, I suppose there's sort of like, I suppose everybody's like sort of that thing like we're all in this together, but we're sort of all in it together in very different ways. And so I suppose my experience of the lockdown may have had some sort of like resonances with other people's, but was probably also extraordinarily different too. I was extraordinarily lucky that I had a roof over my head, I had food in the fridge, and so I wasn't faced with sort of like some desperate scenarios that I know a lot of people were. So I felt extraordinarily privileged in that. But then there was a lot of time to be thinking. Obviously, there was a lot of self-flagellation, or just sort of, I suppose there was a fair bit of sort of odd language around the lockdown and around services in the community and what role people were playing in the community, and then there was this idea of essential workers and non-essential workers, and so it was just this idea of sort of trying to go, well, you know, then is creativity essential? I started having like these really big kind of existential sort of questions floating around above my head, and it was like, oh wow, like maybe creativity isn't essential, but it's essential to me. So but it's not life. I'm not going to be able to save a life. Am I? Can I save a life? Yeah. So it was. Yeah, there was a lot of stewing in my own juices, I think. I think time and solitude and a sense of kind of disconnection from the world, really, in a way. But I do a lot of self-portraiture. I was a solo artist when I was doing performance work, so my process is very kind of it is steeped in solitude at the best of times, and so that part of it necessarily wasn't anything new to me. It was just that I felt like all of a sudden my practice was then placed up against the world picture, and it was like, how what's the context for it? So there was a lot of questioning about why am I making, and what am I making for, and who am I making it for, and how can it help, and is it enough that it just helps me? That just those sorts of things. Gosh, yeah. I mean, I totally understand. I mean, there are people on the front line of this situation that are just extraordinarily important, and they're doing, you know, amazing things. But yeah, it was, yeah, when you it's just that thing where you're just going on. No, I think all my life in my creative careers, so no, I think I'm doing really important work here. I think I'm doing very, very important work, and then all of a sudden somebody comes along and slams not essential, and you're like, maybe I'm not doing such important work after all. And then, you know, like floating around and throwing washing about in my bedroom and filming it was just like, you know, for the work that, you know, as part of Miss Rona. And it was just like, yo, maybe I am non-essential. I don't know. It was just, yeah, it's really, I mean, but maybe there were a lot of artists in times of great unrest and turmoil that also asked the same questions, maybe, you know, like during the world wars and things like that. There must have been people that were sitting down going, how am I helping? Is this helping? You know, the worthiness of it in relation to the grand scale of things or something. Yeah. The contribution to the community, how is that, you know, is it enough? If it's not empirically measured, then, you know, yeah, how is it, how is the work determined? Mm-hmm. There was so much going on inside my head. And then, yeah, right. Yeah, it was that thing that I was talking about. Hey, yeah. It was like, and I think that was one of the things that sort of got me interested in the work that I made, was that just this idea of temporality and just the elasticity of time, and how relative it is, and how during that period it was very difficult to sort of kind of understand a context to where I was in any particular chronological kind of passage of time. It felt very sort of bleached of every landmark that I would have normally used. And then I started thinking, fuck, I'm hoping not swearing, but, you know, fuck, I'm getting Alzheimer's. Like, I don't know, you know those test questions that they do where they go, what day of the year is it? You know, what date is it? What date was it 2 days ago? And what did you do last Wednesday? And it was just like, and I was then going like, I don't know. I can't. It all sort of seemed to sort of like just be this beautiful blancmange. Do you know what I mean? And so the work itself came from I think I spoke about this before, the fact that I was a dancer for 30 odd years, dancer choreographer, and during that time I would have called myself pretty kind of interdisciplinary anyway, in a way. I was always drawn towards the image of something or the composition of something, maybe as opposed to the nuance of the dance or the movement. I mean, choreographic invention necessarily wasn't my bag. Theatricality and a sense of dramaturgy and kind of rich visual imagery was what kind of drove a lot of what I used to make as a performer. So the shift over now is not necessarily been that dramatic, I feel, in a way. I do probably much less dancing about than I would normally do, would have done normally a few years back. But I think that I'm still really interested in choreography, but how it happens within a frame. And that I kind of draw a lot on in my photography, as well as any of the film or animation work that I do. So within that work, I think there was this idea that there was this stripped space, this very bare sort of kind of almost like a blank canvas. I was looking at the idea of this temporality and this elasticity of time, and not quite understanding where I necessarily was, and moving my body through editing into specific spots around the room, but actually it could have been just the same spot, really. There wasn't any definitive thing that was pinning me down. And then just this, I wanted movement in the frame, but I didn't want to be moving around, you know, falling on the bed and doing all of that stuff. So I was like, how can I get movement in the frame, but may not be the point at which be the mover per se? What can I work with that will move across the frame somehow? And so that's when my washing came into play, and in particular one shirt that sort of seemed to fall like, what's the word? Billowing. Bilious? No, that's when you feel sick. Anyway, something like that. Yes, it was bilious. It was bilious. No, it was voluminous. Voluminous. So, yeah, so I was sort of kind of really interested in just playing around with that. But at the same time, I was reading a book about habits and habit making, and for me that was an interesting thing, just because I felt my life was a little bit on repeat. And then that saying, who said it, I can't remember, but that saying of what you do with your days is how you spend your life. And so, and then with that on board, as well as reading this book in regards to building habits, both good and bad, or the psychology behind habit making, then started to lead me to this idea of like, well, if you repeat something enough, then anything is sort of kind of possible. So then that must be how people move objects. And so then I started thinking about, telekinesis and stuff, and the ability to sort of, actually just move an object through my just sheer thought. And if I practice this, then maybe I could do it. Who says I could? You couldn't if this thing of, it's just something that you do all the time that you build upon. So yeah, so there was that, and then just in general, I just really loved the kind of the dystopian type of blankness of it, or something. The fact that it was anonymous, it could be anywhere, and the fact that there was a human body in it, but you couldn't necessarily make out that it was me, or it wasn't sort of kind of personality driven or body driven. It was just sort of, there was a presence, and then there was something moving, and that was sort of kind of on a repeat. And then the voiceover was just meant to be, I wasn't necessarily going to have a voiceover. Then I went, I actually don't do many kind of voiceovers, so I wanted it sort of like that, like kind of confessional, not confessional, but Dear Diary type aside is just a sort of very casual sort of aside. I didn't want it to be like, David Attenborough sort of like, I'm making really a very important pronouncement here, and it was just sort of kind of like a thought, like a thought bubble. I think it was like a thought bubble, mm-hmm. But an oral thought bubble. Well, we see a lot of your premiere on ABC News. Whenever I switch on, he's always there talking up the numbers. And I think that from the outside, it's very difficult to kind of, I don't want to get into the politics of things, but it's just like, I'm finding it difficult to understand that you guys are still where you're at, considering that to date, I think New South Wales has actually got more active cases than what you guys have at the moment. I don't know about the figures on that, don't quote me on that numbers, but like there sort of seems to be, we seem to be on equal footing as far as numbers go, yet you're still sort of slowly being, like let out, and it's just like, wow, but I just don't understand the politics behind it. And so anyway, so there's that, and this idea of the returning to normal is a really interesting one, isn't it? Because I was talking to somebody the other day, and it was just this feeling of like, it feels like what it feels like is this. I came up with a couple of really naff analogies, and I'll just tell them to you now. Anyway, but when you're in a handstand, if you and as you do in lockdown, I'm sure. Well, to say that when in a handstand, you're seeing everything upside down, right? And everything looks familiar, but it doesn't. And so it's a bit like that.